Some people hear the words sewing and knitting and their minds immediately go to Little House on the Prairie or perhaps Grandma's quilts. Not so fast. Sewing is undergoing a renaissance among young artists who are replacing their paintbrushes with needles and thread. See it for yourself at an amazing new exhibit at the Ellipse Art Center, where everything old is new again.
This exhibit is titled The Thread as the Line, Contemporary Sewn Art, which I started seeing as an artist in the late 90s. I just found this an interesting phenomenon. I didn't have a description for it. They're like, what are you working on? I said, well, I'm working on this show that's sort of embroidery, but it's not embroidery, it's sewn artwork, and I don't know what it is. I don't know how to describe it. And they go, oh, well, you mean like tapestries and quilts? And I go, no, it's not quilts at all. And then they started describing it as textiles. And I said, well, no, I don't think you call it textile either. It's just sort of, it's like an intuitive thing. I didn't know where I was trying to go with this. So finally, I started gathering these artists together, and when I finally was like, okay, this is the show. And I had this list of artists, and I had their images, and near the end, you start clearly seeing there's sort of a body of work as a unit in a show, and it all works together, or like a component that's missing and you try to find it so that it feels right. So here I am with this list of artists, and I asked them for their statements. And many of these artists describe their work as paintings. And I emailed some of them, I go, do you guys realize that you're all using the same descriptions? I don't think they even realized they were using the same description. It just happens to be sort of this phenomenon that everybody has the same idea at the same time. And then I realized it's a movement. There are all these bits and pieces of influences all around us, and all of a sudden all these people were doing the same thing. The title, The Thread is the Line, is just that. It's just using the thread as a pencil mark. It's interesting how people want to use thread on paper all of a sudden and sew on paper and not fabric. People really are showing a traditional, sort of old-fashioned medium, and they're making a contemporary. Laura Dragul came here from Baltimore, Maryland, and she has something called, it's the knitting apparatus, and she amplifies people's knitting. We got a really interesting combination of people to show up to knit, which was so interesting, and they all hung out in this sort of semicircle around this suitcase. It was a true knitting circle in a way.
A lot of our mothers sort of denounce knitting as the kind of domestic handcraft, but a lot of young artists came to knitting with a lot of freedom. Right now, knitting is graffiti, it's sculpture, it's performance, as we hear tonight. It's just so many things right now.
Sabrina, I feel like she's sort of a community activist. Her artwork is a form of document, and her zine called Knit Knit that she's created, and then now her book that just came out sort of documenting the whole knit scene. And she's involved with it and she's documenting it.
Knitting is this incredibly flexible medium that can be so many different things. I think a lot of contemporary artists move between mediums in a really fluid manner and are able to integrate slow, laborious handcraft with faster digital technologies and just kind of move from one to another with total ease. And I think that's something that you see in the show.
I'm just really impressed at the handwork and the attention to detail that goes into this type of work. The sort of artist's energy and vision to create this work just merely because they want it to come into existence is something pretty phenomenal. So it's really fascinating. It was more fascinating doing the show than I ever expected.